Welcome to today's Clark Lecture. My name is Kurt Ledwidge, and I'm the Director of Graduate Studies in the Philosophy Department, and it's my great pleasure to introduce this talk today.
You're not being amplified anymore.
Welcome to the Clark Lecture today. My name is Kurt Ledwidge. I'm the Director of Graduate Studies in the Philosophy Department, and it gives me great pleasure to introduce the Clark Lecture today. I'm actually going to give you two introductions. One is an introduction to the Clark Lecture series. I'm going to talk about the person, Romain Clark, for whom it was named. And then the second introduction will be of our speaker today. Okay, so I'm going to start by telling you something about Romain Clark, in whose honor these lectures are named. He was also known familiarly as Beau, so Beau Clark. And he received his bachelor's degree and PhD degrees from the State University of Iowa, where he was a student from the mid-1940s to 1952, when the Iowa faculty included Gustav Bergman, Wilfrid Sellars, and Everett Hall, among others. His first faculty position was at Duke University. And in 1970, he moved to Indiana University, where he remained for the rest of his career. He retired in 1991, and he served as chair of the philosophy department during a formative period, 1972 to 74. Beau Clark was interested in the philosophy of perception, the structure of natural language, and the nature of common patterns of inference in everyday reasoning. His work was well respected, as shown in part by the prestigious fellowships and grants he received, including an NEH fellowship and grants from the Fulbright Foundation and from the National Science Foundation. He was a dedicated teacher who supervised many graduate students at Indiana University. He was also widely admired and respected by his colleagues. Paul Spade, who was Beau's colleague in the IU philosophy department for 20 years, and himself retired, well, it's been a little while now, but in the scheme of things, kind of recently, wrote that Beau was an acute philosopher and one of the few philosophers I've known whose work everyone who knew him respected. No one thought he was crazy, pursuing marginal or uninteresting topics, or that he did sloppy or question-begging work. He always asked the most penetrating questions in departmental colloquy on papers, ones that clarified issues for everyone and went right to the heart of the matter. He was also a man of utmost honesty and just plain good sense. Beau and his wife Lynn had 4 children: Carolyn Hawkins, Kathleen, John, and Ron Clark, and they have generously given money to the IU philosophy department in memory of their parents, both to fund the annual Beau and Lynn Clark lectures, but also to fund 3 annual prizes for philosophy graduate students, 2 for excellence in philosophical writing, and 1 for excellence in teaching. We're very thankful for their continuing support of the IU philosophy department. That's the first introduction. Now it is my great pleasure to introduce this year's Beau and Lynn Clark lecturer, Professor James Van Cleve of the University of Southern California. Professor Van Cleve works in a wide range of topics, both historical and contemporary, and particularly in metaphysics and philosophy of perception, contemporary philosophy. He received his PhD in philosophy at the University of Rochester in 1974, and was a member of the Brown University Philosophy Department from 1973 to 2005, when he joined the faculty at the University of Southern California. He's held visiting positions at Duke, MIT, University of Iowa, and Jadavpur University. He's a member of the American Academy of Arts and Sciences and the recipient of fellowships from the ACLS, the National Humanities Center, and the NEH. He's the author of over 90 articles and book chapters, and the author of 3 books, the most recent of which is his Problems from Reid, 2015. He's currently working on a book. I just learned this on the philosophy of Roderick Chisholm. Now, I remember reading as a graduate student his 1979 Phil Review paper, Foundationalism, Epistemic Principles in the Cartesian Circle. And I remember thinking, I want to do philosophy like that. So it really gives me great delight to be able to welcome and introduce James Van Cleve, who will be speaking today on Qua-Talk and other forms of quackery. So please join me in welcoming Professor Van Cleve.
I must say it's a real honor for me to be giving a lecture with energy on the microphone. Does that do anything? It sounds the same to me. Oh, no, I guess okay. We're telling them a cold, so I might need this amplification. Anyway, I was about to say it's a real honor for me to be giving a lecture that's got Bill Clark's name attached to it for two reasons. One, I'm an admirer of a bunch of his articles, and the other, very early in my philosophical career, I gave a talk here at IU for the philosophy department, and Bill Clark was the chair. I remember how kind he was on that occasion. So with that said, let me start in. Maybe I should say a little bit about how I got onto this talk, how I got onto this topic. And there's a handout coming around, and don't worry about how long it is. 2 sections I'm going to pretty much skip altogether, and I'll let me erase to get through the others, but we'll see how much we do. Well, anyway, I was in on a philosophical conversation once in which somebody was putting forth what sometimes called this supersubstantialism, which is the view that, first of all, faith is an entity, it's a big immaterial entity. That's the substantial part. And it's got little places as parts. And here's the relation between a place and the thing in it. You know, like the places like this and the fist itself. They are identical. Things are places. I heard that, and I thought, that can't be right. And I said, look, here's an objection to that. Places can't move. You tell you places are going to go around. My fists can move. They can't be the same. And came the reply, well, the places places can't move, but a place thing, that can move. And I thought there was something very dodgy and suspicious about that. And then the other instances of Qua-Talk that had also aroused my suspicion. So I started looking into it more as a result of this paper. I have never settled into a consistent pronunciation between qua and quay. I'm talking about qua object, quay object. Come on, more easily. Okay, 3 preliminary distinctions. Wide versus narrow scope is the first. And the wide did not come before the quay. I spoke for the tax quay citizen. It's not the case that I spoke for a board member. Versus quay citizen, I spoke for the tax. Quay board member, I did not speak for the tax. Well, that can sound contradictory. I did and I didn't. And somehow or other, the quay is supposed to get rid of the contradiction. How did we do it? We'll talk about that later. I'm good. With water already, I can tell. I better put it on a level surface. Next, what do quay phrases modify? The subject or the predicate? Well, I think for some people who use it, it's one. For some, it's the other. For yet others, it's probably indeterminate. Now, just to illustrate that distinction, there's a little argument that some people have dealt with using the quay device. This is an argument that the statue and the clay of which it's composed are 2 distinct entities, which some people are happy with and others think is not very tolerable. So the statue is essentially shaped a certain way, melt it down and take away that shape, it won't exist anymore. Not so the clay. It can survive lots of stages. Lots of changes the statue can't, therefore the statue is not the clay. And some folks are going to say, well, in this argument, we have to be more careful about how we state the premises. What's true by way of number 1 is the statue. But a statue is essentially G-shaped. Some people who won't say this want to say the statue and the clay are the same thing. So they got several ways of putting it. Number 2, the clay is not essentially shaped that way. Oh, forget that. Anyway, the statue is essentially, oh, the wrong one. The statue clay statue is essentially G-shaped. The clay, the statue clay, the thing clay, any of those is not essentially G-shaped. Now you cannot, well, depending on how you pursue the Qua there, now you may not be able to infer that the statue is not the Qua. Why not? Well, if the Qua phrase modifies the verb and the predicate in a way I'm about to talk about, then one doesn't say about the statue what the Qua denies of the statue. And so it's not an instance of a Leibniz's law argument, where a and you're identical, whatever's true, one has to be true in the other. I'll spell that out a little bit more when we get to David Lewis. The other possibility is Qua phrases might modify the noun, which is explicitly the case in Kit Fine's treatment of Qua. Third distinction, one not everybody makes, but I think is important, and I first learned about the importance of making it in an article by Richard Cartwright, and thus referential opacity versus exceptions to Leibniz's law. Often they get lumped together, maybe partly because there are long names like substitutivity of identity, common name for otherwise it's called Leibniz's law in logic books. Anyway, I'll just let you read. I know I'm going to get a check. A little example I gave here, which is supposed to show that not all cases of referential opacity involve violations of Leibniz's law. Referential opacity says you can have two co-referring terms, use one to state the truth, substitute in the other, and you might not have a truth anymore. It's really an linguistic law. The other is the one I already stated. A and B are the same thing, then whatever survey would be. I think that's very important. It might save my neck someday if I have to convince the jury that I'm not the robber, because the robber was in the bank and I wasn't. That's Leibniz's law. Sorry about that, folks. Okay. Oh, well, about ready to start in on David Lewis, who has a little theory about how Qua functions, spun off of his counterpart theory. Brief reminder of what it is, where a lot of people will say an essential property of a thing A is one that A has in every possible world where it exists. Lewis will say instead, an essential property of A is one possessed not by A in all these other worlds, because A ain't there, but by every counterpart of it in all these other possible worlds. And when first developed, the theories had it that there's a definite fact about what thing in some other possible world is my counterpart or anything else's counterpart in that world. Lewis gave that up a little bit later and said, no, that's a variable matter, and there are different counterpart relations that you have in mind on different occasions. He says sometimes the very name of a thing might evoke one counterpart relation rather than another. So let's see, let's take this statue, this argument about the statue in the Qua again. Only now I'm using the names Goliath and Lumpel. Goliath and statue is essentially G-shaped. The lump is not essentially G-shaped, therefore Goliath is not Lumpel. And Lewis can reject that argument. He can keep, if he wants, the view that Goliath and the Qua are identical with the new improved counterpart theory, where Goliath is essentially G-shaped, means that all of Goliath's counterparts under the statue counterpart relation have that shape. And local is not essentially G-shaped, means some of local's counterparts under the lump or clay counterpart relation are not G-shaped. And now 1 and 2 do not combine in Leibniz's law fashion. You free because it's not the same property affirmed in one and denied in two of the object. And now to get Qua into that picture. So Lewis had the idea that often the function of the word Qua, or at least it can be first in the service, it can be used to indicate a counterpart relation if the conversational context or the name itself doesn't indicate one. And one of the things he does with the Qua device, so understood, is to show why he needn't believe in Armstrongian states of affairs, entities postulated by David Armstrong as the entities that make the instance true. So it's true that John, the giant panda, is hungry. What makes it true is not a state of affairs, as David Armstrong says, but Qua hungry, a thing, not a state of affairs. So Lewis does this in the interest of avoiding an ontology of states of affairs. Now, what kind of thing is Qua hungry? And how does it relate to Qua panda or something else, or just plain Qua? Lewis's answer, they're all the same. So he says the phrase Qua hungry refers to the panda Qua. And how can he use Qua hungry as a truth maker? Well, the Qua phrase indicates that we're supposed to use hungriness is supposed to be a condition, a necessary condition of something to be a counterpart of Qua. So when we say Qua hungry, is hungry or anything else? Or no, wait a second. Qua hungry is essentially hungry. I guess that was spelled out as any counterpart of Tian under the hungry counterpart relation is hungry. And that comes out true and sort of indicates the essentialist claim. But it makes the sheer existence of Qua hungry something that can't, it makes Qua hungry something that cannot exist unless Tian is hungry. But well, that was kind of a mouthful. I hope it's a little more understandable. But I wrote them what I just said. So that was one of the jobs that he came up with for Qua. I think I'll skip over some material here. See if I can sum it up. It turns out that Qua is a device that creates opaque context for the list. Maybe I should go through this. The statue Qua statue is essentially G-shaped, one might say. And in Lewis's view, by substituting a co-referential term, we can get the statue Qua clay is essentially G-shaped. But that's not true according to him. So Qua phrases, Qua constructions are opaque, which I don't like very much. But as far as I'm concerned, it's not as bad as having to give up Leibniz's law, which Lewis does not have to do, given that opacity does not always amount to giving up Leibniz's law. And I'll just make this one observation about Lewis. I think it was really totally optional on his part. I don't know, to say what he did, that Tian Kui Hungry, that phrase, has the same referent as Tian Kui Panda, or just plain Tian. We really wouldn't have to assign references or relations of co-referentiality to those phrases at all. We could have, and I think we should have, treated Tian Kui Hungry. That's what Russell called an incomplete symbol. And that's a symbol that doesn't have any meaning in isolation. It doesn't refer to anything, even though it's still part of various meaningful sentences. So I read off the example in class is always the average plumber has 3.2 children. We know, we understand that sentence, we can give a truth condition for it. But the average plumber doesn't refer to anything. Lewis could have taken that line. About 20. Tian Kui, and I wish he had. So, say no more about Lewis. And move on to Kit Fine, who also has a theory of don't Kui. I had this initial distinction. Oh, you know, I never used this terminology before. One way to have a Kui term modify the subject is to have it split the subject in two. We'll see that's what Fine does. So I'm going to call Fine a splitter. If you have one way to have Kui modify the verb of the predicate is to have it introduce a predicate of higher adicity. So we talk about monadic property, like being white, maybe dyadic, being so far from the lectern. Newton told us we gotta understand weight, which you might originally thought of as a monadic property. We gotta understand it as dyadic, as you know, how much you weigh is how much you weigh on this or that planet. So often Kui served as one of the adicity upper devices. But that's for Lewis, but it's a subject splitting device for Fine. Three fundamental principles about these Kui objects. Number one, existence. The Kui object, on top of page 4. The Kui object X Kui F exists at a given time if and only if X exists at that time. So not only is there this bottle, but there's this bottle Kui being held in my hand. Identity. Two Kui objects are the same if and only if their bases and glosses are the same. So here the bottle is the base and being held in the hand is the gloss. And a Kui object is distinct from its basis. So the object Kui being held in the hand is different from just plain the object. The model. Finally, inheritance at any time or world time at which a Kui object exists, it has those normal properties possessed by its basis. And that will introduce a distinction between Kim's Kui objects and Kim's events, which up to a point you might think were very similar entities. They both have the existence condition and the identity condition almost the same. But an event, the event of Socrates sitting, is that snub-nosed? No. The Kui object, Socrates sitting, is that snub-nosed? Yes, because it inherits snub-nosedness from Socrates. Okay, well, to get ahead on Fine's theory, let's see what it would say about the statue of the play argument. Well, he, unlike some users of the play, will cheerfully accept the conclusion of it. But he'll have a bit more of a story to say about how the conclusion can be true. So the statue he will construe as the clay way shaped this way. And the clay could just be the plain clay. You don't actually do anything second as with clay. You could, but you don't have to. So yes, you get the conclusion the statue is not the clay, because Qua shaped this way is not the same thing as play. That's the condition coming into play. So he's got a little bit more to say about why these two things are two and not one. What's not to like about Qua objects? I don't have much against them. I will on occasion later to point out how they fail to do some things sometimes wanted them way. But I'll just mention one objection here, which is, for better or worse, I don't know, let you decide how bad it is. You get a crazy profusion of objects. So you get not only Socrates sitting. Let's see. I put this one on here. Yeah, it's the first three listed here. There's Socrates Qua sitting. There's also Socrates Qua sitting. That thing, Qua sitting. And then there's the last mentioned thing, Qua sitting. And so on it goes. So much for flying. Davidson, I'm mostly going to pass over. But I want to say a little bit about how he makes it into the paper that I'm working on. Ooh, I just got it. Heard myself more than usual. Am I sounding more or less the same all the time? Okay. Okay. Well, Davidson doesn't have much use I know of for the term Qua. He does use the phrase under a description in some context. And Elizabeth Anscombe, I guess, a big popularizer of the phrase under a description. And she said, well, it's just a synonym of the old term Qua that Aristotle used. And Davidson does use under a description talk. And he's sometimes taken to hold a view like this. I don't think he really does. So I don't have anything really against Davidson either. I do have qualms about how some people use it. Davidson does have a view you could put by saying one event causes another event only under a certain description. One event causes another for Davidson views. The first event has a description linked by law with some description under the other event. So no causation without law, and the laws have to connect descriptions under which some things fall. So that's where the description comes into it. Now, what some people will tell you is, and I've got a quote on here, Pringle, that shows you what I'm talking about. One thing can cause another. In drinking the drink that the king offered can kill you under some descriptions, and under other descriptions, not kill you. This is the place actually where we have to make the scope distinction. But if you, that can sound like, well, did the drink kill him or not? Well, under this description it did, under that one it didn't. I don't think Davidson has any such view. To try to make the story short, if an event causes another under any description, it causes it, period. And there's none of this doesn't cause it under other descriptions. And I think it's important to say that because some people put into use like this in Kant scholarship. You look at people saying like, what caused some action I did was a free, uncaused cause under its numeral description, but it was a caused cause under its phenomenal description. Well, whatever you think of that, it does not have Davidsonian authority behind it. So that's all I will say about him. Aristotle, why is he in the talk? Why is he in the page? He's not in the talk. Why is he in the page? He's probably the world's biggest user of Qua. He uses it in all kinds of contexts, and I don't begin to talk about all of them. He's also got a theory where it's sometimes called accidental compounds. An example would be Socrates sitting, or the musical Socrates. And these are a lot like Klein's Qua objects. In fact, Klein sorry, not fine, says his modeling is inspired to some extent by Aristotle. So one thing I do in the paper is talk about the parallels between Aristotelian accidental compounds and affines qua-objects. They have a lot in common. So that's one reason to get Aristotle into the picture. Another is there are puzzles about Aristotle's qua-objects. Well, he doesn't call them. He doesn't define them. But some people, there are puzzles and paradoxes about them, one of which issues in the conclusion. This will be down there. And Socrates becomes the musical. So he is the musical. So Socrates becomes Socrates, which sounds very well. How do you get around that? Some people bring in Qua to do it, and they're not going to talk about how it's supposed to happen. And do so in a way that induces at least referential capacity, maybe violations of Leibniz's law. And I like much better a theory by my former colleague Frank Lewis that has Aristotle not identifying Socrates and the using of Socrates. So you don't get into the paradox. You don't have to do the machinations of Qua. Okay. Next figure, Spinoza. He might be the number 2 user of Qua. Or Qua tennis is the Latin, which sometimes gets translated insofar as it is, or it is considered such a way, or sometimes by Qua. And in Spinoza, here's one place where Qua might have some work to do. Here's a puzzle about Spinoza's work and apparent contradiction. And here's 2 things Spinoza believed. He thinks every mind is a body and every mental event is. That's the is magnetic, is a physical event. He also thinks there's never, Descartes was way wrong to say there's ever causation between the mental and physical realms. There's not. They're causally isolated realms. No mental event causes the physical event. No physical event causes the mental event. So here's now the puzzle for Spinoza. How can you square both of those things? So I was once bitten a dog, so the sight of the dog may frighten me. That's mental event causing the mental event, sight causing fright. And that sight is some physical event, motion in the brain. Neurons firing, whatever it is. It is that, and yet it's not. Well, it seems we ought to be able to conclude from that, by Leibniz's law, that the neuron firing causes the fright. Not so, because that would be one of those realm-bridging causal relations that you never get since Spinoza. So how can you get away with all that? So Michael de la Rocca, who written a big book on Spinoza, when you can read about this also in one article that I cite at the end, has pointed out that Spinoza very often qualifies causal things with Qua, for instance, as in this quote, the modes of any attribute, extensions say, have God for their cause only insofar as the Qua only insofar as he is considered under that attribute, and not insofar as he is considered under any other attribute. And de la Rocca thinks that induces a path in which he, like he identifies with exceptions to Leibniz's law. So, God, the extended substance, is the cause of such and such a plant or other eclipse. And God, the extended substance, is identical with God, the thinking substance. God, the thinking substance, does not cause God the eclipse. So that's the apparent exception to Leibniz's law. To which de la Rocca says, yes, right, Spinoza rejects Leibniz's law. That's why you get power. That's how you get into the puzzle. And I would not like it because I really did have to reject Leibniz's law. So I'm going to give one other way you might use Qua without violating Leibniz's law, plus one without using Qua at all. I don't know if you know how it works, but here they go. So in the 1, 2, 3 paradox of Bob, we restate it like this: one prime, M1 Qua mental causes M2. M1 is P1, so therefore it's P1 as above. Therefore, P1 Qua mental causes M2. That would be the Leibniz law inference. Where's it? We'll stop on that. Well, Spinoza can accept 3' as following, but this time it doesn't violate his ban on physical mental causation. It's okay for a physical event to cause a mental event if it only does a Qua mental. Physical event, Qua mental, cause physical event. So that's why 3' is okay with Spinoza. Now, at the same time, you'd have to have the thing I numbered 4, M1 Qua physical does not cause M2. Does M1 cause M2 or not? Qua mental, yes, Qua physical, no. So how can you have both 1 and 4? I'll just say, I won't try to spell this all out here, but the two main strategies, as I go through various authors in this paper, for showing how Qua can avoid contradictions or exceptions to Leibniz's law. The two main strategies for doing it, and sometimes people don't explain it, they just do it. The two main strategies are splitting the subject and upping the indicity of the predicate. And so I tried out whether either of those works for Spinoza or not. I'm not totally sure, but I do try that out a bit. Then here's another possible solution to the opening puzzle on Spinoza. It does not use Qua at all. It invokes hyperintentionality. So I better explain that term. Carnap or David Lewis would say that if you have two necessarily equivalent sentences embedded in some bigger context, you can put one from the other anytime. I guess that means if you believe one necessary truth, you believe all. But anyway, they are, their view is what is denied by hyperintentionalists, who will say that in the cases where P and Q are necessarily equivalent, that something or other, a hyperintentional operator will be one that it truly attaches to P, and Q is totally necessarily equivalent with Q, but the operator doesn't attach to Q. I think you get examples of this all the way back in Plato's dialogues. Well, I'm getting a little bit ahead of myself. I think because, not in the causal sense, but in a metaphysical sense, to do with grounding, it's a good example of a hyperintentional operator, and people who talk about grounding these days are probably going to cheerfully accept hyperintentionality. I'll update Plato a little bit, so not the gods of Athens, but the god of Descartes, maybe, who's necessarily existent, necessarily omniscient, necessarily approves all the only good things. So this is good, God approves it, necessarily equivalent. But you can still ask Euthyphro's question. Is it good because God approves of it? Or does God approve of it because it's good? So that's why I say this goes all the way back to Plato, because the Euthyphro question makes sense only if you have a hyperintentional because. One thing that I think has to be hyperintentional in Spinoza is the relation between a mode and the substance of which is a mode. So Spinoza says everything that is in God. God is the one substance. Everything else, you mean the chairs, the tables, are modes of God. I think a mode is something whose existence consists in or happens because God is a certain way. My fist, I think, is a mode because it exists only because my fingers are clenched. And a wave in the ocean is a mode because it exists only because the water heaves up the end and so on. So, and we are all modes of God. Well, anyhow, this little chart is supposed to try and get Spinoza out of the opening puzzle. That mode one, so look at the little chart on the top of page 7. That mode one causes mode 2 would be underlain by the fact that the mode constituting fact about God stands in that double arrow relation to the mode constituting, the mode 2 constituting fact about God. That's supposed to unpack the causation. That double arrow is at least causation, but it makes something stronger. And then the identity of the modes would come out in the necessary equivalence of the 2 mode constituting facts, that's in the middle column. But the 2 bottom row, the first 2 bottom row things don't yield the 3rd bottom row. Oh, no, that's not what I mean to say. They're consistent with the 3rd one. So even though mode 1 is identical with P1, you don't have to say that P1 causes them to, because the fact about God constituting P1 might not stand in the double arrow relation mode constituting, mode 2 constituting fact about God. All that requires the second thing to be hyper-intentional in Spinoza, namely the 2-place operator that I expressed with the double arrow. So I don't know if you can, I don't know, actually I'm not very optimistic about this. I don't know if you can find some other way of dealing with Spinoza's puzzles, you know, with all of them, without invoking Qua stuff I haven't found out. But I would give it a try. Last philosopher, Kant. I've already mentioned one way in which people use Qua in dealing with Kant. You know, how can the same action be caused and free? I'm going to go on to something else now. So Kant scholars argue about whether things in themselves and appearances are are 2 classes of entity or one. Sometimes this is called one world versus 2 world interpretations. 2 worlds, you've got the world of appearances, things in space and time. The appearance concept is like the rainbow. It's an appearance to our minds generated by raindrops and light. And then he says, oh, we want to radicalize this, and the raindrops and the light. Anything in space is an appearance arising in us when things in themselves do something to us. So everything in space and time is an appearance. The underlying things in themselves are not in space and time, they're aspatial thinking. So that sounds to me like a pretty good argument for the 2 world interpretation. And lots of people want to say, oh, appearances and things in themselves. You go way wrong. You think they're 2 classes of entity. They're the same thing, considered in different ways. So I'm going mainly on an article by Colin Marshall here, who has a subject splitting use of Qua to try and get something that he thinks is close enough to a one world interpretation of Kant. So he explicitly uses fine as his model, and even uses the term Qua-object, Qua-object. And his idea is, the first idea behind the idea is what I put on page 7 using bold print. The bold print is his device. So you can represent, you can list all the properties of the thing, putting in bold the essential ones and in regular type the inessential ones. But whenever there's an object characterized like that, there's a zillion other objects in the same place coinciding with the original one, depending on what the pattern is of assigning essential or accidental to all the properties of the list. So you bold a few more of them. That's another object that's also there. Distinct from the first one. Some of you will recognize this view as one that sometimes gets espoused these days under the endorsement name modal primitive. So Marshall's idea, based on that, is you can take some object that appears to be, like this, a man carrying a ladder across the room, and it appears to me, I see it happening now. So an appearance would be like a finite Qua object, where you man carrying a ladder, Qua appearing to me would be a Qua object. That's an appearance. So anytime you, and I should have said earlier, if I didn't, we're talking about fine. It's a principle of his that the object A Qua F is going to be essentially F. The original A might be accidentally F. A Qua F is essentially F. And you get that feature in Marshall too. So the man with the ladder appearing, Qua appearing to me would appear to be essentially, and that's an appearance. That's what an appearance is. A thing in itself is something Qua not appearing. So it's essential that things in themselves that they never appear to us. And then what Marshall then tries to do is show how the kind of objection I raised against one-world things of the outside can be met by this theory to some extent. Accepting the objection, but finding a way to live with the result. Appearances are spatiotemporal, yes. Things in themselves are not spatiotemporal, yes, also. And so he does accept the inference from that appearances and things in themselves are not identical. So he's no flouter of Leibniz's law. But he says there's nonetheless an intimate relation between an appearance and the thing itself. They may share the same subject or substrate. So an appearance might be a Qua appearing, and the thing in itself might be a Qua not appearing, not identical. That's why one can be spatiotemporal, the other not. But wow, they're built on the same X. And that's supposed to be good enough to be call yourself a one-worlder. I have a number of objections to what he says. I put two of them on the handout, and I'll just go over the second one, which I think is the really fatal one. I've listed there the recipe for an appearance Qua object. It would be X, the substrate, plus F and G. Somewhere in those is appearing in some way to us. And then the corresponding an sich in itself Qua object would be X, F, G as before, but not appearing in any way. And this is supposed to be using Fein's ideas. Well, one of Fein's principles was the existence principle, which says x qua f exists if and only if x is f. But as soon as you bring that in here, you're going to get trouble. So the appearance object will exist only if x appears. The an sich object will exist only if x does not appear. The x can't both appear and not appear. So the appearance object, the an sich object, they cannot coexist. And so there's no way they can share a subject if they can't coexist. So that's my biggest objection to one way of using Qua to solve a problem in quantum interpretation. And now let me see if I can summarize a few things. Despite my title, I'm not down on all uses of Qua. And, I use them every day once myself at the beginning. As a board member, as a citizen, I spoke for the tax as a board member, but Qua board member I did. I guess what I'm mostly against are uses of Qua that try and use and dodge, isn't trying to dodge an explanation without saying, hey, how does that work? Or ones that explicitly renounce Leibniz as well, as some of them do. Others, including some of the ones I talk about here, are okay by me. But let me just say a little bit, I talk about two main ways. I'm down on people that use Qua to get around the contradictions without saying how it happens. I talk about two main ways that it could get around the contradiction, legitimately, upping the unicity, splitting the subject. Let me talk about the little view I led off with. So take the view that a place is a thing. How can that be? Places don't move, things do. Comes the answer, the place Qua place. That answer doesn't work. Place Qua thing, place Qua apple. That can be. Well, many of the theories I talk about here show how that would work, and I think the answer is no. Take the Lewis theory. Notice that the Lewis theory can only be applied to modal predicates. X Qua something or other is moving. He has no account of what that would even mean. X Qua something is essentially immobile. Okay. Modal predicates is what this theory applies to. But I won't use mobile, immobile. I'll use is stationary is moving in raising my objection, and there's no foothold for the Lewis theory there. It doesn't apply to non-modal things. How about the fine theory? Board. So can we use Fine's Qua objects to deal with the thing and the place? I guess we'd say something like this. The place, and the place, and just let's just place. The place doesn't move, it's stationary. But the place Qua apple, that can move. And the place Qua apple is different from the place. A Qua B is not going to be the same thing today. So it looks like contradiction avoided, but wait, not so fast. Remember, one of the fine principles is properties of the base are inherited by the Qua object constructed on that base. So if the place is stationary, the place Qua apple is also going to be stationary. You can't say the place Qua apple can move. So the fine theory won't help the super substantivals. And maybe I will stop there.
We're going to take our customary 4-minute, 30-second break and then reconvene for questions.
Oh, I guess not.
Yeah, why don't you?
What is this?
Oh, this is for Zoom.
Oh,
Yes, this is our little makeshift Zoom.
it's been happening all along.
Yes, there are people on Zoom. Yes, yeah. Okay.
So, 20.
Yeah, well, you know, we could plug in my iPad to this. Yeah.
Yeah.
Right. Let's find out.
Oh, sorry. Oh, so yes. Thank you.
I didn't bring mine down. Ideally, Monday this weekend.
Oh, that's good. I was, testing myself this morning. But just a very dry. I rushed to I almost had the last 9 days. I know, but I heard it still, my throat's still a little hard. You're just like, yeah, so much it's going around. I know. Well, that's why I was having Right here.
No, me too. I had all time.
So close to go up and start.
Yeah.
Okay, is anybody not back yet? Okay, good. So go ahead and start. So I'm going to moderate, and just so everybody knows what our practice is, I'm going to prepare a list of people who have their hands up. I'm going to try to start with a graduate student, and then go to a faculty member, and then back and forth. So let's see. Have a chance to raise their hands here. Juan, we're going to start. Go ahead.
Okay. Yeah, really interesting talk. Thank you. I was wondering if you could say more about the x qua f function and how, like, the usefulness of that function, because it seems to me that, like, in the case of Kant, for example, it could also be useful for saying something about the one world versus two world dispute. You could treat X as either thing in itself or as an appearance.
For that. Okay. Something about the usefulness of the x qua f function. So that sounds like Fein's device. Whenever there's any object O, like my phone, and any property F now possessed by my phone, like I have Mitch and Dale. There's also the object thumb quay nil niched. What's that good for? Well, let's see. He uses it to solve the problem with the statue of the clay, or to at least explain why that's a good argument. Saying you can't identify the statue of the clay. He's trying to see how that works. I'll just have to refer you to this article, Accidents and Things. I think it's what I was using, where he puts it to use in action theory in some interesting ways, which I don't know if I remember well enough to recapitulate right now. There's some puzzles on action he uses it to address. There's some things it's not good for. It's not good for understanding some everyday uses of qua. I think I said in the beginning, I spoke for the tax qua citizen. I did not speak for it qua board member. Now, how would Fine handle that? Well, it would come out, I qua citizen spoke for the tax. The I qua citizen spoke for the tax. I qua board member did not. Oh, yes, I did, because I qua board member inherits the properties of I. One of my properties is speaking for the tax. So I qua board member spoke for the tax. So did I qua citizen spoke for the tax. So did I qua board member. So some everyday use this theory does not help us with at all. But I didn't think what he said about action. It's kind of cool. I just don't remember it right now.
Thank you. Richard. Thanks very much for the talk. I had a couple Spinoza questions. One was about De La Rocca's solution. In particular, I was unclear why he needs to claim that qua induces opacity, and more generally, why does he need qua at all? Why not just say that causation induces an opaque context, and then you get the same sort of results for the failure of this argument from substitution? The second one was concerning your hyper-intentionalist solution. I guess I was just wondering about what's happening with the facts on the top row of your table, because those are still there, I take it. But then it seems like we still have a violation of Leibniz's law. So it's unclear to me why we succeeded in solving the problem.
Well, About your second one, I'm just going to say, good point, and I'm not sure what to do about it. I mean, some problematic stuff equivalent to this stuff. This stuff isn't that problematic. Why is the problem still there with the original stuff? Yeah, that's something I have to. Oops, sorry, work on a little more. The first one was why does Del Rocca need Quay?
Yeah, so I would take in Michael's view to be that causation induces, that causal terms introduce opaque context. And so you don't need the additional claim that Quay is introducing context. You can get by with just saying causation is intentional.
Yeah, and I think some people, there are a few people who have said causation is opaque. And it may have gotten there without going through it in that place. I think you're right. And why does he do it? Well, partly because this happens in the course of interpreting Spinoza. He uses Quay on every other page. So I think his route to it might be something like all causation is causation Quay, and causation Quay involves the passing. But you could get the conclusion without premises.
Thank you for the talk. I have just one question to clarify something I may have misunderstood about the notion of hyperintentionality. So you gave the example of the fist and the fingers in a certain position that are constituted what the fist is. And you gave this example while talking about hyperintentionality. But I don't see how these are not necessarily equivalent. So I would just want to ask you to clarify why the example of the fist was supposed to shed light on the notion of hyperintentionality.
Actually, if you'd asked me to give an example of hyperintentionality, I would not have started with this. And I don't think there's anything obviously hyperintentional there.
So it is not hyperintentional.
Well, I think in Spinoza, one way of understanding Spinoza, it is. One way of understanding is in relation between mode and substance. But it would not, ab initio, have been a good way to illustrate hyperintentionality. I think the euthyphro question would be my favorite way of introducing it. So even if you have views about God under which there's a necessary equivalence between this act is right and God approves it or commands it or whatnot, there's still room to ask the euthyphro question. Is it right because God commands it, or does God command it because it's right? And you're saying, well, is it P because Q or Q because P? If it were intentional, the because relation, a la Carnap and Lewis, P because Q, you can just infer from that. Q because P, So put Q for P there, put P for Q there, P because Q, Q because P. You get the both. So they can't handle hyperintentionality. And I think there is legitimate use for hyperintentional notions. Now, why did I think it's in relation to Spinoza was hyperintentional? I think because he might want to say, he may think, or he sometimes interpreted it as thinking that there are necessary equivalences between the mental and the physical. And so, hard for me to see that, but suppose he says that, and he wants to say the existence of the wave just consists in the ocean heating up. The existence of some physical mode consists in God doing something. Now, God's doing that thing that generates the existence of the physical mode might be necessarily equivalent to his thinking some thought. But Spinoza would not want to say his thinking the thought generates that physical thing. So I guess there's a pretty good case for thinking the in relation does have to be hyper-intentional in Spinoza, although I don't think it's an illustration of, in other words, I don't think his philosophy is very plausible, but
Yeah.
Your name? Thank you very much for your talk. So you say that Lewis could have gotten away with treating locutions like Tian-Chan, Kui, hungry as incomplete symbols.
yes.
But I'm having trouble seeing how he could have gotten away with that, because for Lewis, that locution, Tian-Chan, Kui, hungry, is supposed to name a thing that makes the proposition that Tian-Chan is hungry true. That is, Tian-Chan, Kui, hungry is supposed to replace the Armstrongian state of affairs, Tian-Chan's being hungry, in a theory of truth-making. So can we at once say that Tian-Chan, Kui, hungry is an incomplete symbol, and at the same time say that Tian-Chan, Kui, hungry is a truth-maker?
That sounds pretty right to me.
That we can, or that we...
No, what you just said. I think you've given a good reason why Lewis does have to take Tian-Chan, Kui, and we have this being a thing. I have to think that usable. I think it's true in general that yeah, I think that the reason I said what I did is I think you can spell out what it means to say Tian-Chan, Kui, hungry requires the existence of that. Tian-Chan, Kui, hungry can't exist unless Tian-Chan is hungry. I can give the truth conditions for the various things he says using Kui without taking the Kui phrases to refer to him. But the special use against Armstrong, you might be right there. To this point, to have things not states of affairs be truth makers. We may have to be more than symbols.
Yes, thank you. I just wanted to think a bit about the discussion of Kant, sort of how Qua-Talk is maybe functioning there, and maybe with Spinoza. I'm not thinking about the other cases. So my thought here is to defend the talk is that through many of these cases, it looked like he wanted to say this, this Qua phenomenon, this Qua phenomenon, or this, as if we could re-identify the same thing, right? We could say this, Qua this, it's the same thing. And maybe part of the point of the talk, at least in people like Kant and maybe Spinoza, is to signal that we're at this point we're at the barrier, we're at a borderline between different ways of individuating things, of defining not just sameness but difference, right? So that if you're crossing that barrier, well, you can't really say these things are the same. You also can't say they're different, because there is no coherent, well-defined sense of their sameness or difference. And so, as a reply to questions of Kant, is this a one world or a two world view? Maybe the right answer is you can't count worlds, right? It's neither one nor two. These cannot be distinguished in a way such that sense has that question has sense, and that the Qua-Talk is meant to mark that. So I don't know if that's relevant to the problem. And you could say something about the mental and the physical in the same way.
So you ask, why suppose that ex qua phenomenal and ex qua phenomenal. I used to say the name of variable twice, but
right. The starting assumption that X has
well, you
has
have to assume that
Yeah.
I don't know how to say it. That X qua F is the same X, as X qua something else. I suppose in Kant, you wouldn't have to unless you were bent on having a one world view, where there's one set of things which do such and such qua phenomena. So if you're such a person, it would be important to identify the two subjects of qua.
Yeah.
But outside of that project, and then you'd be not going for one world or a two world either.
My worry there with Kant is that to already assume that we're identifying or not identifying the same thing has already begged the question at stake here. That is, it's already rejected the central thesis of transcendental idealism.
To which question?
Well, sorry, I should make this too much about Kant. In the Kantian context, the central thesis of transcendental idealism. That is, if you're already asking the question, is the same thing, are these two things or one thing, with the assumption that that question makes sense, that they're well enough defined criteria of individuation, right? Then you've already given up on transcendental ideas. Right? And then the Qua-Talk doesn't help you, but that's because you already sort of decided against it by assuming that sameness or difference have a well-defined sense.
I'm not sure I see why assuming that sameness and difference have a well-defined sense amounts to giving up transcendental idealism. It might be it might be already supposing something in the debate between one worlders and two worlders, but I guess I don't see how transcendental idealism as such would be given up as something. I mean, let me just state what I take.
Yeah, sure.
Kant's transcendentalism, that's no idealism to be. I'll try and put it in a different way. All appearances have spatial temporal properties. No things in themselves do. So, and I take him to be an idealist like Berkeley about things in space and time, but not a total idealist. If a total idealist is everything is minded. Let me back up a little bit. Like Berkeley, because things in space and time are mind dependent. So he's an idealist, but everything is space and time. Total idealist, everything mind dependent? No, because the thing in itself, almost by definition, I think that's contentious, is something that exists independently of minds. Well, anyway, but going back to the neutral way of putting things, everything in space and time is, every appearance is spatial temporal, but that's not yet idealism. No thing in itself is spatial temporal. Everything spatial temporal is an appearance, not a thing itself. So that, I think, would be pretty close to Kant's own way of putting it. And with that much said, then there's still room for debates about our appearances and things in themselves, classic meant to be something somehow the same thing, or your alternative is the question how you will define whether appearances and things in themselves are the same.
Thank you.
Dave?
Oh, thank you for the opportunity to think about Qua-Talks. I love them. I think I started the Q&A thinking this was an objection or a worry, but then
thinking over. I don't know. When you say you're a fan of Leibniz's law and you want to preserve it and stuff, I can think of a bunch of different statements of Leibniz's law. It's usually used in a negative way. You got two things. If two things are identical, then they share all the properties. They share all properties in some sense. Either they're intersubstitutable in open formulae, or there's a capital F X if and only F. So when you think of Leibniz's law, what do you mean?
Well, if I had a blackboard, I would write it out as A equals B with equality of the sign for identity. Only if the A property F, A has F, only if B has F.
But okay. And so my question here is, I mean, you said that that's not the same thing as referential capacity or distinct, but like, if we think of those property terms as, are there kind of referentially opaque properties, like being Jim's favorite object or whatever, right? Like, it seems to me you have to restrict the quantifier a little bit in order to get that, and I wonder if it doesn't amount to the same thing. Basically, they have all the same properties, excluding all the ones that create referential opaque content. And similarly, this is why I'm wondering how this may actually help us. And fine, you make a lot of. I really like what you did at the end there with the thing. What is it? Location, Quay, Apple or something, right? Apple, Quay, Apple, and then location, Quay, Apple is like, well, what can I do with Quay here? Well, it can't. The normal property exists, as fine says. The thing Quay that has all the normal properties, so you can only do so much Quay. And so that's why I don't know if it's a question or anything, but like, it seems like what kinds of properties are at stake here, and what's the things are taken in the statement of Leibniz's law is really important for what you're doing.
Well, you talked about the need for putting some restriction on Leibniz's law, and
as in the quantifiers in the statement of that.
Yeah, and lots of people do that. I don't know if it makes sense for even the majority, but a lot of people. So they say they have in mind some intentional with the T properties, like being A equals B. Joe believes that A is smart. Joe doesn't believe that B is smart. You get that. Involving Joe's believing, intentional with the T property, which some people say, oh, it's also intentional with an S. Something to me is intentional with S. To me, we can't make that. It might be kind of a long debate, but I myself don't see the need to put any restriction on that. I think it's for all properties. And you don't have to. Sometimes people say for all extensional properties it holds, but intentional ones not. When people say that, I would like them to spell out what extensional and intentional means, other than the ones obeying Leibniz as well, the ones that don't. But I don't see the need for it myself, and I think at bottom, here's what I would have to admit myself to. At bottom, I'd have to say the alleged counterexamples to Leibniz's law involving the properties of incorporated belief, for example, are no better than this alleged counterexample to Leibniz's law. The top of page 2. This is Corey's example. I'll put the Ionione with Paul Ionione because of its size. The identity terms of Ionione. Ionione is identical with Barbarelli. Therefore, Giorgione was called Barbarelli because of its size. So true premise is false conclusion. Is that an example of Leibniz's law? You're shaking your head. Yeah, I don't think that's a counterexample at all. There's no property affirmed in one of these. There's no property affirmed in Giorgione. One premise. Let's see. Number one doesn't affirm a property of Giorgione that has to get passed on to Barbarelli. It doesn't. I guess it ought to because it. There's no such property. I don't think there's any such property as being an item X such that you are called X because of your size. No such property, and that would be the property you need to construe the 1, 2, 3 as the counterexample of Leibniz's law. Okay, and there will be a lot of work on my part to show why the counterexamples involving belief are at bottom no better than that one.
So it's like, so Leibniz's law is, hey, if you're identical, then you share all the same properties. But in order to explain that, explain what the genuine properties are. And what I'm saying is, and he finds, principle that you appeal to that I found really satisfying. I mean, he's talking about, if, A qua F inherits all the normal properties of A, right? So that right? And so I'm saying, like, that's, I think they're kind of the same thing. The normal properties are the same thing as the properties to which Leibniz's law applies.
Yeah, I think there are two questions there. One is whether there's a parallel between his restriction to normal properties, whether that's logically parallel to the restriction you say something with Leibniz's law. The other question is whether the range of normal properties would be more or less the same. When he says this, he doesn't explain in general what a normal property is. He gives a couple of examples. And one of them, I think, is having become prime minister in a certain year. His example is all time. So maybe Mrs. Thatcher became prime minister in a certain year. There'll be various quaint things Mrs. Thatcher is about that don't. So yeah, there's two questions here. Is it logically parallel to have his restriction on what properties are subject to inheritance? And is that logically parallel with restricting the range of properties that have to be commas and things that are identical? There's logical parallel there. And do you agree that there's the normal ones, the same kinds of ones? So I think about both of those.
Thanks very much for the talk. I have a kind of two-part question about your first objection to Lewis's theory about how it does not take the notion of essence serious. So the first is, well, I don't know, maybe this is kind of supportive of the line you're going in, but it seems to me that your objection is deeper than just an objection to Lewis's use of the qua relation here. It seems like your real objection here is to counterpart theory,
yes.
Period, right? So we're on the same page. I think that it's that, look, you say you quote Quine's characterization of Aristotelian essentialism, beginning with an object. Well, for Lewis, when we talk about an object, what are we talking about? Well, and then when we try to talk about that object's modal properties, what would it mean to say that an object of itself and by whatever name or none must be seen as having some of its traits necessarily? Well, in order to evaluate whether or not this object or whatever object you choose has a certain modal profile or other, well, that's just a matter of having certain counterparts in certain other possible worlds certain counterpart relations or others being picked out contextually, presumably. There's a lot of hand waving here, obviously, but so it seems like it's not really the Qua relation that you're objecting to. It's that this whole notion of it seems like we can't use counterpart theory, at least in the way that Lewis understands it, to cash out a is really is a kind of defense of Lewis here. Why couldn't Lewis try to say something like this? Well, for an object O has some essential property E, just in case, for every counterpart relation in which that object stands to objects at all possible worlds. For all such counterpart relations, the relevant counterpart of that object at that other possible world exemplifies that property. Now, it's very natural for you and others to respond immediately. Well, that's going to give us a pretty thin array of properties that are essentially or necessarily, I'm conflating those just for present purposes, essentially or necessarily possessed by any object. But it seems that, for a mad dog Humean like Lewis, that's as it should be. Consider just by way of example, the Goliath and Wumple case. It seems that Lewis would feel comfortable saying something like this. Well, yeah, Goliath and Wumple differ in many of their properties, but nevertheless, all of the counterparts of Goliath and all under every counterpart relation we might choose, and all of the counterparts of Wumple under every counterpart relation we might choose, at all those worlds, those counterparts are not going to be non-material. They're going to be at least material objects, for example. So there we would have, if we use this rough sketch of an account of essential properties in terms of possessing a given property, an object's counterparts under every counterpart relation at all these possible worlds picked out by that counterpart relation possessing that property, at least Goliath and Wumple would turn out both to have the essential property being material. Right? So anyway, I know that's a lot that I threw at you. I didn't want to take up even more time, but anyway, I'm curious what you think about those two parts.
Okay, first objection, I agree. So I have to look at it. I got to see I put it on the handout. It wasn't an objection to Qua theory as such. Qua theory. It was an objection to the underlying counterpart.
Oh, there we go. Okay.
You're quite right about that. Second, and not even counterpart theory as such. I mean, if he wants to say that no thing is in two different possible worlds, it's only counterparts. No, I don't have an objection to that part either. It's only his relativized notion of essence that was not part of original counterpart theory, but I think first raised its head 3 years later. And that's where he says, oh, you can have different counterpart relations and different verdicts on essence depending on which counterpart relation you have in mind. So that's what I object to. Something in between original counterpart theory and his use of it in Troy is the in between. And your second point sounds to me like what you're doing is saying Lewis wouldn't have to make essential properties of dime a dozen in the way I complain about handout.
Yeah, I was wondering whether or not this would tie to the thing. I wouldn't want to test it.
It seems to me you've got, I don't know what to call it, super counterpart theory of essence of something where you don't say, I'm essentially if under, let's see, you don't say, I Qua A, I Qua F, and essentially G, if in the F appropriate counterpart relation, all my counterparts are G. Maybe I should have comes out there by saying this order. All my counterparts are G under the F appropriate counterpart relation. That's what he does say. And you're pointing out, he could say, I'm essentially G if all my counterparts under any counterpart relation.
Exactly. Make it a conjunctive report.
And then instead of a dime a dozen, it could be right. So yeah. Yeah.
So a few minutes ago, you were explaining why you think the inference from 1 and 2a to 3 on page 2 fails, but I'd like to hear what you think about an alternative explanation. So premise 2A says something about two names, the names Giorgione and Barbarella. It says that those two names designate the same person. But it seems to me, and maybe I'm wrong about this, but it looks to me like what gets substituted in 3 is not a name, but rather a name for a name. We're not substituting Giorgione for Barbarelli. We're substituting inverted comma Giorgione, inverted comma, or rather the other way around, inverted Barbarelli, inverted comma, for inverted comma Giorgione, inverted comma. So we've substituted a name for a name for another name for a name. And that seems to me like it makes the inference invalid. 2A doesn't say that the name of the name Giorgione and the name of the name Barbarelli designate the same person. Then the inference would be valid, but of course that would be false because 2 inverted commas Giorgione, 2 inverted commas, that doesn't refer to a person. That designates a symbol. So does that make sense? Do you think this is a reasonable explanation of why the argument fails? Because that's an explanation that doesn't require us to reject substitutivity. So to be clear, that's why I thought it would be relevant.
Well, okay, so you called attention to 2 ways of understanding inference from 1 and 2 ways of 3. Is one of them valid and one not? Or
well, one of them's valid, but one of the premises is false. The other way, all the premises are true, the inference is invalid. So what I'm suggesting is the arguments 2A is only true if we take it to be a claim about the name of Giorgione and then another one of his names, Barbarelli. But what gets substituted between 1 and 3 is not a name for a name, but a name of a name for a name of a name, right? We get quote Barbarelli end quote substituted for quote Giorgione end quote. Am I making sense? So if we did substitute the name for the name, then it seems to me like the right substitution would be, we would go from Giorgione was called Giorgione because of his size to Barbarelli was called Giorgione because of his size. That's what we would get if we substituted the names rather than substituting the names for the names. But then it seems like the argument would go through. It would be right to say that Barbarelli was called Giorgione because of his size.
yeah, I would before it I'd like you to dictate to me the conditions under which the inference goes through, because I'd like to write that down so I can think more about it. Before we do that, it looks to me as though we should say that the inference from 1 and 2 into 3 is validated by the principle that one of 2 co-referring terms can be substituted for the other. That's what I call substitutivity. So haven't I done what that principle says I may? So G, I'm jumping on something. The G and the B thing are co-referential names, and I've substituted one for the other to arrive at 3, which is false. So I think that'd be a problem for the substitution. So that was the original.
But it's not a saying substitutivity. You can say wherever the string of symbols appears, you could substitute the name that string of symbols, because that string of symbols could just be in the middle of the whole name, right? And just produce something that isn't even a word, right? Now, it just happens as you put something in quotation marks, you'll get a name. But it doesn't mean every context in which the letters appear are ones in which you can substitute anything else which has the same string of letters, right? And that was Klein's point about the quotation stuff too. It's not a use position for a name. It's not a name's position. It's not a function, not an argument position. So that's what you're saying.
So
I think
you're saying it would not be a good use of substituting to say the names Tom and Bob point to the same person. Mary has a pet Tom cat, therefore Mary has a pet Bob cat. That would not be proper use of substitution.
Yeah.
So what would be the right way of putting substitutivity so that what I just said is no longer accountable?
Well, I mean, if you take the principle in the way I think you're taking it, you get the Tomcat Bobcat problem, right? And that's obviously no sensible substitution principle should license that. So you've got to talk about what a name in the use position in the sentence, that is used as a name in the sentence. But then if a name is in quotation marks, is it being used as a name in the sentence? The answer is no.
Okay, so
Same thing for
I
predicates.
think I gave a counterexample to the principle as I put it on the header, but maybe you're saying that's not a good statement. Or no, I didn't. No, I guess I didn't put the principle. So I just said what would be the opacity that's an exception to it.
Yeah, there's some unclarity about the principles you've stated here. A term T1 refers to the same thing as term T2. There's a sentence containing T1 in which we cannot substitute T2 with reservation of truth value despite co-referentiality of T1 and T2. Now, what does containing T1 mean?
I see.
Right. Does that mean it contains that name as a name in the sentence? Or does it mean it contains that string of symbols somewhere in the sentence?
So not just as a orthographic part of something,
Right. Yeah.
but how would we put it positively containing?
Well, I would say in a use position, we can probably spell out a little more precisely by talking about what axiom how you would generate a composition out of the sentence using the axiom for the name. That would be the way to make it a lot more precise. So
Properly stated, the substitutivity principle would not be attacked by my example.
Right.
Okay. Now, that leaves the question of larger concern to me. What's the relationship between the substitutivity principle properly stated and Leibniz's law?
Well, it'll never give rise to counterexamples.
Which will?
Substitutivity problem never generate problems with Leibniz.
Oh, okay.
Properly stated.
Okay, so it sounds like you're agreeing with the thing dearer to my heart.
Yes, I agree.
Okay.
No, Leibniz's law all the way. No.
But I wanted to write down what you said about what makes the inference go through.
Yeah. You want me to write it down later or say it now?
Oh. Yeah, we should have a chalkboard or something, but give it in your head and so I can, or would you all like to what you did it now?
Okay. So I actually don't think, I think there are two ways the inference can fail. I don't think there's any way the inference from 1 and 2a to 3 goes through. The two ways it can fail is by 2a being false or by the inference being invalid. And so I think that the way you in fact put 2a on page 2 makes the inference invalid, because what 2a says is that the name Giorgione and the name Barbarelli are co-referring. But that doesn't mean that that in 3 we get a substitution of co-referring terms, because what gets substituted in 3 is not the name Barbarelli for the name Giorgione, but the name for the name Barbarelli for the name Giorgione. And those are not co-referring terms. right? One of them refers to the name Barbarelli, and the other refers to the name Giorgione. So that's consistent with 2A. The name Giorgione and the name Barbarelli can be co-referring. Without the name of the name Barbarelli and the name of the name Giorgione being co-referring. In other words, I think the inference is invalid in exactly the way the following inference is invalid. 5 has 4 letters. What? That wasn't a very good example.
5 is 2 plus 3. We said 5 is 2 plus 3. So.
Oh, I'm actually thinking of Cicero has 6 letters. Cicero and Tully designate the same person. Therefore, Tully has 6 letters. Right? In the first premise, we get a mention of the name Cicero. We get a predication of the name Cicero that's got 6 letters. In the second premise, we get a claim about that the name Cicero and the name Tully designate the same person, right? And then in the final sentence, we get a claim about the name Tully, that Tully has 5, or that Tully has 6 letters, just like Cicero does. But you see, what we've substituted in the third premise isn't the name Tully, it's the name for the name of Tully. I'll stop there because I'm taking up a lot of time, and it's not clear at this point that I think I'm going to have to think more about how to put it.
Okay, I'm still not clear on how names of names. Really, what's going on here? But yeah, maybe we can talk about that later. But your Cicero Tully example shows the something like that. That was a good example.
John.
Yeah, it's I think simpler than that. It's a straightforward and balanced syllogism. I forget if it's a second or third figure. Because they both have the same subject, but middle term is Giorgione, and the conclusion you can draw from it is that somebody Giorgione, because of his ties, is called Barbarelli. You know, that's known since Aristotle. You can't get a universal conclusion from a second or third figure syllogism.
I'm going to need a Venn diagram. I don't remember my figures and stuff.
No, I should go back because I'm working on a medieval text. But anyway, it's an invalid syllogism.
Just as a syllogism, it's valid. Never mind the problems.
Okay, well, while other people are thinking about getting in the queue, I'm going to put myself in the queue. Ask one or a number of different questions. So, I've always thought when someone uses the word play, they should tell me what they mean by it. Whenever you see 2 people using it, there's no guarantee they're the same thing by it whatsoever. And given that, it's obvious that we deserve to have an explanation about what it means. And it seems to me when you force someone to say what they mean without using the word play, it always turns into something else, something more sensible. Now, I was thinking that maybe there's no single thing that goes on when people reach for the word play, but we know there's going to be one item, there's going to be a property, and then there's going to be a predicate relation of some sort in the words. And they're trying to say something about the relation to the item and the predicate in relation to the properties, something like that's going on. Now, it struck me that there are a number of cases in which what is going on has something to do with the notion of explanation. So, in the case of Davidson, I don't really think that he ever said anything like A causes B under the description such and such. I agree that thought that they were subsumed by laws only under descriptions. But I think that is connected to something we endorse, which is that one event would explain another event only if chose the right description of both of the events. And that those are the descriptions, either which are the ones that subsume, under which they subsume by a law, or they're such that they, depending on the type of explanation, rationalizations of actions are given there, or they point in the right direction. So they point to some law, strict law, that goes to things of virtue, which the standard calls relation. And then for Spinoza, I was thinking, his notion of cause, since he's, he thinks everything's necessary, can't quite be the ordinary notion of continued causal relations between things. So I think that's also a kind of explanatory notion. And so then I'm sort of thinking what Bridger said, that already, if it's one thing causes another, it explains it. You've already got some intentionality there, because an explanation is kind of filling in a gap in our knowledge of something. And so it's going to matter what the gap is, and then what the actual properties are that we cite of the one thing and explaining the other. And even if two things are identical, and so it's physical and mental, there may be things that follow from the fact that it's mental that don't follow from the fact that it's physical. And if you think of causation as explanation, then that would explain what's going on with Spinoza. You say, yes, Qua M1 causes this, or more simply, M1 explains M2. That is, that object with that having that property explains this object having that property. But having P1, having that property doesn't explain this thing having M2, because there's no conceptual relation between the two. I was thinking that the Davidson, what's going on, and when people, gesture toward Davidson in this, someone that's leading the way, and what's going on in Spinoza is really the notion of explanation.
Well, I have seen the following given as a gloss of what some of the medievals meant by A qua F is G. So A qua F is G. A is F, and A is G, and it's G because it's F. And I was reminded of that first part of your talk. So you thought people forced to explain what they mean by qua might be, I have to bring in a because. So it is.
Yeah, well, I'm not sure that it's going to be completely general.
It doesn't handle all these
right. Yeah, the mobile case. This play statue, this play on the play. Yeah, it doesn't quite fit that.
But were you suggesting that to the extent that qua is embroiled with intentionality with an S, it might be because it unpacks in terms of the intentional with an S explanatory relation?
Yeah, I'm suggesting that in many contexts in which people use the terminology of play, what they're thinking about is explanation, not in every context necessarily. So I think there's some of the cases that talk about the unified in that way.
Yeah.
And I see Bridger has a follow-up or
not a follow-up.
I want to keep going. I have another thought, but I will hold it for later. Go ahead, Bridger.
I wanted to ask a sort of follow-up to my earlier question about the hyper-intentional exclusion, the word with Spinoza. And I have in view your middle column on this table. So I think if the ground of M1 and ground of P1 are supposed to be necessarily equivalent, but not identical, and that's where we get in
you say that one more time?
So ground M1 and ground P1 are supposed to be necessarily equivalent, but not identical.
Oh, let me see.
Is that the view?
My notation was meant to be read like this. G is not for ground. I think it was supposed to be for God. Yeah, I gotta think about it. I gotta
Okay.
remember.
Is there a grounding relation between those things and the things on the top row of that column? Or an adherence relation?
Well, yeah, I think I'll say yes to that, but the way to read G sub M1 is, first of all, it's a formula, not a term. So we can define it earlier. And it means that fact about God, which is the ground for the existence of mode 1.
Yeah.
And then you ask whether the whole statement in the bottom box is supposed to be the ground of the first. Yes.
So maybe I'm still not getting your formula quite right, but is it the case that GM1 is explaining M1, but it's not explaining E1?
Yes.
Then how do we not establish a violation of Leibniz?
Or I'll put it without using explains. M1 might be grounded in GM1. The existence of M1 consists in this fact holding about God.
But then P1 is not grounded in GM.
And I can't think about that. Ooh. I'm not sure. Is P1 grounded in GM1? That's the question.
Yeah, because if not, then it looks like we have
This
problem
P1
with
grounded in GM1. But let me say yes, just to see if trouble arises.
Well, so I'm not sure. I mean, so then I'm kind of wondering about what exactly is the relationship between GM1 and GP1? Because I took it that the hyper-intentionalist stuff was supposed to be saying that these are necessarily equivalent, but we're not asserting an identity. But now it's unclear to me why they're not identical. It's also grounded.
Well, I kind of think so. Things grounded in the same fact should be identical.
Yeah.
So so okay. So we have so I guess I'll stick with saying P1 is grounded in both of them. Oh, actually, now I don't know. You sent it back to the drawing board.
Kirk, to you.
Yeah, I mean, who knows with Spinoza? It's hard to figure out. But these terms, M1 and P1, they're being used here as if they're designated, right? But also, they're not supposed to be sort of simple designators like a directly referring term. Content is supposed to have some kind of content. So, well, then you might think maybe we should take some kind of sort of broadly Freudian view of it, where there's here's a term M1, it's a mode of presentation of object. Here's a term P1, it's a mode of presentation of object, the different modes of presentation of the same object. And then, in order to avoid a contradiction with the top line of the chart, we're going to have to take that arrow itself to be a intentional, express an intentional relation. So you can't substitute terms on the when the way you mode of presentation shifts. So the truth is going to be sensitive to the mode of presentation of the object. And that's the only way to avoid contradiction.
You're saying that about the single arrow at the top row.
Single arrow, yeah. Because, given the identity, if you just substitute this, what you were saying on the upper right-hand square, you're going to get something that contradicts the thing over on the left.
You're saying the only way you can have the top row is by having an intentional relation to the single arrow.
Yeah. And if you just read it as causes there as explains, you're home free. Because that doesn't. And I think that's why we should read cause and Spinoza.
And it is a causation. Explanation.
Yeah. Oh, 6:05. I thought we had plenty of time left. All right. We have a chance to follow up on things that didn't get explicitly discussed here. In the reception in the next room, and I invite all of you to join us there. But let's first